Okay, Dad, where's our first stop?
All right, today is going to be maybe the biggest church that we visit this entire time. We are going to LCBC, Lives Changed by Christ. We're going to Manheim, which is the original site, and as I understand it, this church is now 25,000 people. They're a multi-site church all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're going to talk to Pastor David Ashcraft. It's going to be really exciting because he's got a lot of really important things for the church and kind of a cool guy. So excited about the visit today. We are sitting in the parking lot of LCBC Manheim, as of course all good interviews happen in front of our RV, because we are interviewing today David Ashcraft, the former senior pastor, now retired with the Advantage with Global Leadership Network, and we are super excited to have this conversation with you today.
Scott, fun to be here. Andrew, thank you for being here and taking the time to come out here. Appreciate it. I've not ever done this in a parking lot before, so this is exciting. So
neither have we. Yep. First time for everything. We're just getting started, getting rolling. So I wanted to ask you, just as sort of like a little bit of an icebreaker, something to kind of personalize this a little bit. I want to know a little bit about you, a little bit about who you are. Obviously a pastor, we know you do all these great ministry things, but like dogs, kids?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a couple things real fast. Grew up in Texas. As a Texan, I have to say that. So outside of Dallas, Texas, my dad was a pastor, so similar to you, Andrew. Because my dad was a pastor, everybody told me when I was young that I was going to follow in his footsteps and be a pastor, so I was very determined not to be. And so I went off to school, studied business, thought I was going to go to law school, and it wasn't until my senior year in college, when it was time to apply to law school, that I actually, God had worked in my heart enough to apply to Dallas Theological Seminary. And still thought I wasn't going to be a pastor then. And I was working in camps a lot at that stage of my life, and so I thought some type of parachurch kind of ministry, but not pastor. But started working in my dad's church in the Dallas area. He was leading a church of about 2,500 there, and so through seminary worked in the church. Said I wouldn't be a pastor, but I was willing to work in a church. And then when I graduated, they invited me to stay on, be one of the pastors there. Said I'd be a pastor, but I don't ever want to preach. And it was just kind of fun. And what I appreciate about God is He'll take us as far as we're willing to go, and as long as we're willing to step out and follow Him, then He keeps opening doors. So continued to do that. Moved here in 1991, and it was a big deal to move to the Northeast from Texas. Everybody thought, what are you doing? And back then, 1991, Rust Belt is what at least people in the South consider the Northeast. So that was a real big deal. But it's been a great thing. We've been here now a little over 35 years, and Texas is still home. So when Ruth and I travel, if you were to see us somewhere else, and you said, where are you from? Ruth would say, we're from Texas. We happen to live in Pennsylvania. Even though we've been here in Pennsylvania almost as long, or actually longer than we were in Texas. So yeah, so kind of interesting from that standpoint.
So being from Texas.
Yeah.
Favorite barbecue?
Oh man, as far as place or?
Either place, meat, preparation, what's your favorite?
So, I was more of a Tex-Mex than barbecue. So I love barbecue, I love brisket, I love the pork, actually I love pulled chicken, but probably Tex-Mex was the biggest thing. And so when we moved here 35 years ago, the best you could do, even Mexican-wise, was Taco Bell. And it's like, oh my goodness. So we mourned Texas, not so much moving away from family that we missed them and friends, but it was really Tex-Mex. And so every time we go back to Texas, then we hit every Tex-Mex place we can and get as much as we can. So
that's awesome.
And Andrew, you asked about family, so I've got to tell family real quick. Ruth, my wife, and I have been married now 47 years. We have 2 kids, Justin and his wife. He's one of our campus pastors here at LCBC, actually. He has a 6-year-old daughter, so we have a 6-year-old granddaughter. And then our daughter, Ashley, her husband, also live in the area. She had been one of our student men directors for about 10 years and stepped away with her 2 kids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so I didn't think I was going to be ready to be a grandfather, but I love being a grandfather, and it's just lots of fun. And so fun to have them here in the area as well. Yeah, and we do have a dog. We've had numerous golden retrievers. Right now we have a mini golden doodle that looks more like a golden than a doodle, but we love her. Her name is Bailey, and enjoy that a lot. So, yeah.
All right, so now that's you a little bit. How about ministry side? You told us Dallas Theological. Give us a little bit of the rundown of your ministry.
Yeah, okay. So again, growing up around church all my life, not wanting to be a pastor, worked in camps, worked in church in Dallas for about 10 years, and my title there was Minister to Adults. And it was funny, coming out of Dallas Seminary being right there in Dallas, we had a real strong adult Sunday school program taught by Dallas Seminary profs, all of them with THDs. And so it was almost like 12 little mini churches kind of going on inside our church, and supposedly I was responsible for leading them, and I really had nothing to do with them. So I had that experience, and then moving here to Pennsylvania in '91, first time as a senior pastor, and had started sensing for about 2 years that God was leading us away from the church in Dallas, where I felt like God was leading me to lead on my own. But we looked for about 2 years at churches in Texas. And again, as a true Texan, we said, God, we'll go anywhere you want us to go in Texas. And so we looked at literally over 30 churches. None of them were right for us. Over a 2-year period, finally decided maybe God wants us to stay in Texas. But about a week later, got an overnight package from a little church up in Pennsylvania, and so we just said, let's go ahead and follow through with the conversation. God led us here, and then it's been a great experience for us here.
So I've heard you say, it's not a little church anymore. I've heard you say at a retreat where you spoke for some Lutheran pastors that we are the largest church no one's ever heard of. And you said that as a badge of honor, and I thought that was fantastic. That was so endearing. What did you mean by that?
Well, and the interesting thing is that's something that other people have labeled us as, and we actually love it as well. And I think probably, Scott, what we mean by it is it's never been about personalities. It's never been about me. It's been about introducing people to Jesus. And so we've done everything we can to build a church and help grow a church that is able to introduce as many people to Jesus. And it's never been David Ashcraft's church. Most people don't even know who I am around the country. And so it's always just been about introducing people to Jesus. And what I see happen a lot, Scott, is when you start growing as a church and you start getting to that 4,000 or 5,000 person number, then you get noticed by other churches and other leaders, and you're invited to be almost on a speaking circuit. And what oftentimes happens, then that pastor will spend so much time away from his church that his church begins to plateau and it's not growing anymore, and they can't figure out why. And the reality is they've taken their eyes off their church and put it on themselves, so to speak. And so I just said I'd never want to do that, and just want this to be about what God is doing and introducing people to Jesus. And really our hope was long term that this will go on for generation to generation, well beyond me, and just creating the systems necessary to continue to introduce more and more people to Jesus.
You would attribute most of that, what you just talked about, the staying focused on the church, being present, to the growth that you were able to see and kind of be a part of during your ministry?
Yeah, I would say, Andrew, that's definitely a part of it. And, our first 5 or 6 years were very tumultuous. 150 people when we came, and you'd think 150 people, this should be kind of a slam dunk and easy to lead, and yet it wasn't. And we had to figure out what our purpose was, why we do what we do, why we even do church. And you would think that when you land on saying we want to introduce more people to Jesus, that everybody would be, yes, we're all about that. And probably my experience is every church has that in their doctrinal statement somewhere, that they exist to introduce more and more people to Jesus. But the reality is most churches don't want to do that. And the 30 churches that we talked to in Texas, every one of them said, yes, we want to introduce people to Jesus. But when you started digging to see what they were willing to do that, most of them go, yeah, we don't want to go that far to introduce people to Jesus. And so first 5 or 6 years, it was, again, early 90s, and so some of the music wars, and is it hymns, is it back then choruses, is it contemporary, is it not? We made decisions to say we're going to do whatever we need to introduce people to Jesus. So we're going to go with contemporary music. And that alienated a lot of people with that, and it's not about us, it's about others. And so you ask one of the things that helped us grow, I think it was that constant commitment that it isn't about us. And we would just tell people when they come into the church, okay, now that you're here and you know Jesus, it's not about you anymore, it's about your friends, your family that don't know Jesus yet. And so that's been one of our driving things, always about others. So I think it's some of those kind of attitudes that kind of make a difference.
Yeah. I was going to ask a question about that too. The woodcut signs that say others inside of your offices.
Yeah.
I was going to try and find a way to ask about that, but obviously it's something that's lived.
So when we were first, again, starting as a church, when I came, the church was about 3 years old, and one of the founding couples, somehow he had come up with this idea of others, and I don't even remember where he heard it. So that became kind of our kind of charge and crying call as a church to say, let's always be focused on others. And so over the years, we've done different things to help people remember that. And probably, I don't know, maybe 5, 7, 8 years ago, then we had 25,000 of those little wood cutouts for others and gave them to everybody. And so you go into the homes of a lot of people of the church, and they've got them up on, usually they're up on a door frame or something, just to remind yourself as you're going out the door, hey, this isn't about me, it's about others.
I love that.
Yeah.
So so again, 153 years old when you first got here. You talked about tumultuous 5 or 6 years. When you retired, the church was 22,000.
Yeah, we had a weekend attendance about 22,000. And when I say tumultuous, Scott, it was where every time I'd come home from a board meeting, Ruth had asked me, do you still have a job? When she was packing up for Christmas each year, she'd say, am I packing up for next year? Or am I packing up for a move? And, there was a guy in the church named Abe who was my greatest nemesis. And from the first few weeks I was here was against me. And so early days, when we were small, churches in Lancaster all had little mailboxes or cubby holes on a back hallway. That's where you'd get the news of the church. And so it's funny, my title was senior pastor. I was the only pastor. And so I cleaned bathrooms. We did whatever we needed to do. And so, yeah, exactly. And so I'd stuff the mailboxes with news of what's going on in the church. Abe would show up and he'd stuff the mailboxes with all the things he thought I was doing wrong. And that went on for about 5 years, and we were growing during that time, but just real challenging times. And at some point, right around 5 or 6 years, and I don't know that I could tell you what caused it, but we stopped talking about who we wanted to be, and we just started being. And there were just stories after stories of people coming to Christ and people inviting people to know Christ. And so it just kind of took off and began to kind of explode from there. And so we went from that 150 when we started to 5 or 6 years, we were probably at about 600 or 700. We started building and adding to facilities when we were about 1,200. Thought that was going to slow our growth because we were asking for finances. And actually, we didn't focus on the buildings. We focused on introducing more people to Jesus. And we just said the whole reason why we're expanding our facilities isn't for any of you. So this isn't a nicer auditorium. This isn't a gym space. This is really more seats so more people can be introduced to Jesus. And so things just kind of took off from there. And instead of losing people like we thought we might during that first time, we actually grew by 50% that year. And so just interesting to watch that happen.
So what happened to Abe?
Abe just kind of drifted away at some point. We had a congregational meeting. So back in those early days, if you had a congregational meeting, everybody would come because there were always fireworks. And so they wanted to see what was going on. And so we were going to hire our second staff person besides me, and our first one, and a worship leader. And so there were about 100 people in the meeting. And Abe in the meeting stood up and said, why would we hire anybody? Nobody could work with David. And so I'm sitting in the meeting just going to, well, thank you, Abe. Any other comments from the floor? And we went ahead and hired Brian. And I think Abe just finally realized I wasn't going to leave. And so he moved on and went somewhere else.
So was the lesson there persistence?
Well, I think there's something about that. And I also think, Scott, I love long-term pastorates. I think often, and John Maxwell is somebody I listened to a lot when I was younger, and he would always just say that pastors leave too soon. And they're in the middle of a storm, right on the edge of the clouds, kind of clearing, but they leave before that actually happens. And so one of the things that I did coming to LCBC is I had told God, I'm not going to ever look to go anyplace else. And I said, if you want to move me, you're going to have to move me, but I will not go looking. And I'd watch pastors, especially in the Dallas area, around Dallas Seminary, constantly looking for the next step for themselves, the next best place. And I just said, I'm not going to do that. And so he didn't bring a whole lot of things my way for a long, long time. And so it was just, I'm here and I'm here to stay.
Well, it's funny, as I was going to ask you that, I was going to say, what would God have had to do? Because obviously it never came. So would it have to have been a big fish in central Pennsylvania that came and swallowed you and spat you out someplace else?
Probably, yeah. Well, I mean, and even just dangling opportunities in front of me, I think would have also been interesting. But they're really the first 10, 12 years, there were not those opportunities. And then once they came, and once Ruth and I got through that initial 5 or 6 years, we said, why would we want to go anyplace else and have to go through this again? We're finally at a place where we believe God wants us as far as the style of church that we are and what we're doing. And so why leave that? So.
So you went multi-site.
We grew to, in this location, about 8,000 people. And so, I don't know how much you guys can see, but we're out in the middle of cornfields. So we're out in the middle of nowhere. And people were coming from hour and a half away. And the township told us we couldn't expand our facilities anymore. And what we had thought we were going to do is just build a bigger auditorium and bigger building here. And so when they told us we couldn't expand, and farmland is just number one here. And so they said, you've already taken up too much farmland. Everything is 2-lane roads around here. You're tying up the roads, so you can't build anymore. And we were devastated and thought, oh man. But we kept asking ourselves the question, are we done yet? And even when we were small, when we went from 1 service to 2 services to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, constantly we just say, okay, are we done yet? And we're not done yet, so what do we need to do to keep introducing more people to Jesus? And so when we hit that wall, we just said, are we done yet? Does that mean God's done with us here? And we said, no, we're not done. And so we started looking around the country, and that's about early 2000s, so it's about the time multi-site was getting started.
Community Naperville, Seacoast.
Yeah, so yes. And so we looked at different models, and I'd always frowned on church planting, and I think church planting ought to happen, but the fail rate is so high that I just said, man, why would we invest in that and have a failure rate of 4 out of every 5 locations? There's got to be a better way to do it. So when we started looking around at multi-site, we said, man, we could actually do this. And so we put a team together of business leaders, and we mapped out a plan of about 5 locations that would surround this location here in Manheim in communities, and we started working that plan. And so that would have been right around 2005 or so when we started doing that. And what we would actually do is we'd send off, we sent off to one location 250 people that were already a part of LCBC, and it's about 30 minutes away. And then another direction we sent off about 500 people. Another direction we sent off about 1,200 people. And so we just kept sending off people to start these other locations, and it just worked beautifully. And you guys do multi-site, so it works. And the way we actually did it for our church is one weekend we had taped the message in advance, didn't tell anybody, and then when they showed up, they watched a message that had been taped on Thursday night. Nobody complained about it. We said, so see, you just experienced multi-site and video teaching. It works. And there were really no more concerns after that, and we just kind of took off from there with that. So
The process of sending.
Yeah.
You talked about people moving in directions where they came from.
Yes.
In general, did that kind of help protect the local church? Like the idea of that church being a local place where everybody was?
Yeah, that wasn't in our thinking, Andrew, when we did it. Our thinking was that most people are willing to drive, and the studies we looked at said people are willing to drive about 20 minutes to church. And so we started seeing all these pockets of people that were driving 30, 45 minutes, an hour away. And so we said, we're not doing this for you guys that are already coming, because you're willing to drive 45 minutes. But you've got friends and family and coworkers that are 45 minutes away that the idea of going to church is foreign to them. And then the idea of driving 45 minutes to church is really foreign to them. And so in our message, again, it's the whole others thing. We say, as we're starting these locations, it's not for you. And so if you're going to go to that location and just sit and kind of soak it in, this isn't for you. It's for you so that you can invite people in your community to come and be a part of it. So I guess in some ways, it was, but that never was our thought process so much as it was just to say, this is for you to introduce more people to Jesus.
It is ascending.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Now it's funny, as we continued on, sometimes the word is almost cannibalizing, because what happens here in Manheim is we had 8,000 people. You start sending away, and so we sent away about 4,000 people. And then pretty soon you're surrounded. We had surrounded Manheim with 5 locations that were all within 30 minutes, each of them in different directions to Manheim. And so again, this is not a populated area. And so for people to come to Manheim, they had to drive past another campus to get to Manheim. And so we have to work to make sure Manheim stays strong, and it does. And so it runs about 5,000 to 6,000 people now on the weekends. But we have to protect Manheim and make sure that we don't hurt ourselves with some of the other locations.
Now, when you sent people, especially the first time, you had to have heard, you used the word cannibalizing. You had to have heard you're gonna kill this church if you send all those people away.
It was all so new back then, and so the multi-site movement really got started in the early 2000s, and it was new enough that nobody had figured that out yet. Once we'd sent everybody away, then all the churches like LCBC that had a larger main initial campus and sent people away, then all of a sudden all of us realized, oh, wait a minute, we sent away all of our pioneers and all of the people that love to go out and do something new, and now we've got a church full of settlers, which is totally fine, but they're not quite as aggressive and they're not quite as adventuresome as maybe the ones you sent away. And so it just changed a little bit the culture here that we had to continue to work and massage and make sure we were being who we wanted to be here as well.
So did the messaging change? Do you remember a conscious moment when you said, okay, I have more settlers here than pioneers, I've got to message differently?
I don't know that there was a message change, and it was never anything we said to the congregation, but it was something we knew internally, and so it just took more work sometimes to get people to lead. You send away a lot of your good leaders, but the other thing that happened, Scott, was it allowed people then that had been on the sidelines here because there weren't enough openings for them to serve or lead, opened up a lot of positions so they could step up and lead. And then what also happened on these new locations, I can think of one in York, which is about 30 minutes from here, and we visited a couple before the York campus opened, and they were heavily involved here, and we had dinner with them. They said, oh, we'll never go to York, we love Manheim, and they started going just to help out at York one time, and they've only been back now in 13 years to Manheim 2 or 3 times, and they just love it, and so it allowed them to step up and lead in ways that they never got to lead here, and so it just creates more opportunities for people to serve and lead and use the gifts God's given them.
Yeah. It's a huge blessing to have those types of people all over the place.
Very much so.
In your congregation.
Very much so. And what we learned after those initial 5 or 6, we had surrounded, so again, our community's not big, and everything in Pennsylvania, for the most part, outside of Philly and Pittsburgh, is fairly rural. And so we were like, where else can we go? And so we adopted our model and shrunk it down. Our initial locations were all around 2,000 people. Then we came up with another size that the goal was about 700 people. And then more recently, we've even adopted another model where the goal is between 100 and 300 people. And we have maybe, 7 or 8 of those locations that are in that range. And they're the biggest things in their counties, the biggest churches in their counties. And that's with 150, 200 people. And all of those, the fun thing is all of those for the most part are strictly video. The teaching's video, the worship is video, everything is video, and it works beautifully. And we weren't sure it would, but people love it. And people in a little tiny town, 2 hours from here, they love being attached to something bigger and something that they feel like is alive and thriving, and so that's been a real cool thing too. The other thing we've done is several churches wanted to join us, and so adopting churches. Initially, the very first one we called it a merger, and then very quickly we realized, well, it's not a merger because we're not saying because the implication of a merger is we'll take our ideas and your ideas and we'll merge them together. And we said, no, we like our ideas the way we're doing it. And so if you're going to join us, you're going to become us. And so we've learned very quickly not to say mergers, but instead we'll adopt you into our family. And so we've got about 3, 4 locations that came that way. And not just, oftentimes churches will talk about mergers, and essentially they were just handed a property with maybe 20 people. Ours were, one of them had about 1,000 people, the other had 1,200 people. The most recent one was almost 2,000 people. So it's been big churches joining us and becoming part of LCBC.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's a part of the problem with a bigger church is that it becomes impersonal. So how have you combated that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Scott, when you say that, and people say that all the time, all it takes is even a church of 200, and a church of 200 can become impersonal. Yeah. And typically what you'll hear is the average church in the United States is 75 people, and the reason for that is that's how many people one pastor can reasonably serve, remember their names, get them involved. And so when you get to 150 or 200, the same problem exists. And so for us, the way we've combated that is create systems. And so when it comes to caring for people in the congregation, I'm not the most caring person in the world, but I know it needs to happen. And so if you're in the hospital, you don't want me to come and visit you, but we've created systems where you're going to be better taken care of at LCBC than I think any other church in the country, because we have systems in place, and we found people in the church that love to do hospital visits, or they love to go to homes. and pray for people. And so we create systems for that. You encourage people to get involved and connected to small groups. And what we found is if people are not connected, within a year they'll leave. They come for the music, they may come for the teaching, but if they haven't made relationships, they're going to leave. And so it's real critical that we get them tied in. And so we'll get them tied into small groups, we'll get them tied into serving or being in serving groups, and somehow you've got to connect them. And we'll use illustrations of like putting Legos together. You've got to somehow connect them, or even Velcro, where you've got to stick them together, but constantly saying, how do we get people connected that way? And so then I don't think, I'll just say one more thing on your question. What's fun for me, even still today, but Ruth and I will go to different locations where we've never been before. So we have 25 locations now, and we'll go to locations that I've never been to before. What's fun is I'll walk up, Ruth and I will walk up, they instantly feel like they know us, and yet we're not and weren't perceived, and even Jason today, who's my successor, they don't perceive him as they do as their pastor, but more so their campus pastor. And so they know that we're kind of the leader of the church, but man, if I've got a need, I go to my campus pastor, and he's the one that's really going to pastor and shepherd me. And so you just have to create the systems and structures to make sure that's taken care of.
Yeah, one of my favorite churches nearby us in Indiana is a multi-site church. It's a large church as well, and their campus pastor said, he's got great relationships with all the people that are there, and it's not uncommon on any given Sunday for someone to walk out and ask him to introduce them to the preacher.
Yes.
And he said, well, the preacher's not
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Oh, he wasn't here? Said, no, that was...
I just saw him. I just watched him.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But
and we'll
get
get that as well. Yeah.
They wanted to say something, and he said, well, you can tell me. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they'll talk with him about whatever they were experiencing, which is really great, because again, it builds that relationship with the campus pastor as well.
And Scott, once you establish that, so it's probably the hardest for the first couple of campuses, and you guys are at 2 or 3, I think right now, 5. Okay, so you're at 5. You're at that awkward stage where people are getting used to the fact that they probably all can't know you. Once you get past that, everybody that comes to the church, they know they're not going to get to talk to you probably directly, and it's no big deal, but it's the people that knew you, it's the people that knew me when I was the only pastor, or we were just one location, and 500 or 600 people, they felt like they could shake my hand on the way out the door. Those are the people that probably struggle the most. But beyond that, once they come in, they realize, I'm probably not going to get to talk to Scott, but I will get to talk to the campus pastor, and he's the one that's going to care for me. And the other thing I'll just say too is it tends to be more of a hang-up for church people than non-church people. And so very early on, we said, we're not trying to steal people from other churches. We're trying to introduce people to Jesus. And so people that have not been in church, they don't know what a pastor is supposed to do, and they don't know who the pastor is supposed to be. So you get to teach them and say it's the campus pastor that's going to provide care and spiritual growth for you and things like that. So.
All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit here. So you have multiple theological degrees as part of this ministry, and I like to say the pastor is kind of the theologian in residence. So playing on that a little bit, in your confession, what parts of your confession really aid you in being a church that grows? What are the parts that you lean on heavily?
Well, it's funny. One of the best things that ever happened to me was moving away from Dallas. And when you live in Dallas, around Dallas Seminary, at least in the Bible church, so the church that I was in was called Schofield Memorial Church, was my dad's church, and it was one of many Bible churches in the Dallas area. And the things that you thought were important in the Bible churches in Dallas Seminary were all deeply theological thoughts or questions, and you thought that the world hung on those theological issues, and you would fight about them between churches. Once we stepped out of Dallas, I very quickly realized most people don't know about those theological issues. They don't care about those theological issues, and for the most part, they don't even matter. And so, Dallas Seminary, if you're familiar with it, the big thing is dispensationalism. The big thing is end times and the tribulation and all of those things. And you talk 60% of the time in Dallas about those things. I don't think I've ever talked about it here, maybe once in 35 years, but it doesn't matter, you realize. And so what matters is introducing people to Jesus. And so I think my soteriology and evangelism and just learning what it means to trust Jesus by faith alone, that was strong teaching that was important to me. And Dallas Seminary gave me a real strong foundation so that it's enough to keep us from getting off track if there are things that kind of come into the church, and I don't mean just LCBC, but the church world, and you go, I don't think that's quite right. It's given me that foundation, but it also has allowed me to go, I don't think that really matters right now. What's most important is that you come to know Jesus. What's most important is you begin to follow him fully, and because you are coming to Christ at a different time than me, then I've been a follower of Jesus for, I don't know, 55 years or so. I ought to be further ahead than somebody else. And so we constantly talk about life change is a process, and we have people sitting in our gatherings. If you knew the people around you, I mean, everybody kind of looks the same, and as pastors, we know some of the stories, but if you knew the people sitting around you and their stories, you'd think, oh, what are they doing here? And yet that's what we want. We want them to come into this environment, rub shoulders with you, listen to me, listen to their campus pastor, serve in different places, and then they begin to grow, and they'll take a couple steps forward, they'll take a couple steps back, just like we all do, but they will gradually grow to be more and more like Jesus and fully follow him. But fully following Jesus means different things at different stages of your life. And so for me to be a fully devoted follower, I know a lot of information, and so it's almost harder for me to be a fully devoted follower because I know a lot, and I don't want to do a lot of what I know I ought to be doing, whereas somebody just comes to know Christ, they only know 2 or 3 things, and so just do those 2 or 3 things, and you'll learn more as you go. And so anyway, it's an interesting tension to kind of work through.
And sometimes there's a tension, right, between those who've been around a while and know a lot, and then newbies, and you almost expect them to know what you know, and you're like, why aren't you following? We're on step 71. You know, why aren't you following step 71? And I'm on step 3.
Exactly.
Right? You have to be patient.
And so that's what we constantly say. Coming to Christ, life change, it's a process. And sometimes churches almost expect people to come into the church as already fully grown followers of Jesus. And they're not. And so they're going to come in with all kinds of baggage. Some of them come in with church baggage if you get church people. And that's almost harder because they're followers of Jesus, but they've been hurt or they've been taught ways that we kind of go, that's probably not the right way. People that come in with baggage, whether it's lifestyles or, I mean, everything, you know, Scott, from gender issues to all kinds of things. And so, I mean, we've had people sitting in the auditorium. We had one guy, I don't know, 10 years ago where there'd been a family that was murdered on Friday night. We found out later, we didn't know, but the guy that murdered the family was sitting in our auditorium here in a church service. And I mean, you don't know who's around you, but that's all part of the process of bringing people to Jesus. So
that's a story. I mean, that would absolutely that must have freaked you out.
It is, but we didn't talk much about it, and because we know that happens. I mean, not that kind of thing all the time, but you just don't know who's around you, and so you're just talking to everybody. And my way of teaching is to say, look, this is what God says about how to do life and how to do it well. And it's up to you. And so, Andrew, if you want to follow, that's great. Understand if you don't, there'll be some ramifications. God says, you know, this is the way to do it well. If you choose to do differently, then you're going to have some fallout from that. But that's your call. I can't force it on you, but I do need to tell you this is what God says. And Scott, you may choose to follow it, Andrew not, but that's up to you guys. And I think sometimes as pastors, we get hung up and think, I've got to change you and I've got to change Andrew. And I can't. It's not for me to change you. For me, it's to tell you what God says and guide you as well as I can, but it's up to you and the Holy Spirit whether you choose to follow it or not. So,
we're also wondering about your church, your one church, multiple locations. So thinking theologically for a second, maybe a simple question, but a pretty profound answer. What does it mean to be a local church?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I'll just say I love the local church, and as a local church pastor, and I would call myself a local church pastor, as somebody that works with, we have an organization we started about 3 years ago called The Advantage that works with pastors just in Pennsylvania, and so we work with about 440 pastors in Pennsylvania, and then I also get to have the opportunity to lead the Global Leadership Network, and that's focused on pastors and helping them be better leaders. So I'm around pastors all the time, and from the GLN, for years, we've said that the local church is the hope of the world. And meaning that, some people go, oh, Jesus is the hope of the world. Well, Jesus is actually the Savior of the world. But in Ephesians chapter 3, it just says the church is the method that God chose to introduce more and more people to Jesus. And so if a church is not healthy, and if a church is failing, then people aren't ever going to know Jesus. And so local church is hugely important for me. The form, Scripture doesn't really give us an exact form of what ought to be like, or even what an elder board ought to look like, or a deacon board. And so for us, we just said it's never been about growth. It's been about introducing more people to Jesus. and we keep it as simple as we can. We have no committees. It's all very, very simple. We have 8 elders. It's not representative of all the locations. They're just wise, godly men that set the course and direction for the church. We have a staff of about 300. And the local church is, to us, it is LCBC. It just happens to be 25 different locations. So, and we all do the same thing. I mean, if you go to any of our locations on a weekend, we sing the same songs. We sing them pretty much the same way. You're going to get the video teaching. Kid men, student men is all done the same way. And so you know you're at an LCBC location. But what's interesting, of the 25 locations, I would guess, I don't know, maybe 10% of the people have been to multiple locations. Most of them, they just go to their location. And as a staff, early on, we would get hung up and say, well, that's LCBC Manheim or LCBC Ephrata or York or whatever the location was. Very quickly, we realized the people in York, they don't go, oh, I go to LCBC York. They say, I go to LCBC. And the people in Ephrata don't go, I go to LCBC Ephrata. They just go, I go to LCBC. And so for them, that is the local church. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I love that that mentality that the local church is the local church. My wife and I yesterday, as we were here to prepare for this, we were walking through downtown Hershey, and a young woman walked by us with a coffee mug that said LCBC.
Oh, is that right? That's fun.
LCBC. She went, yeah, that's my church.
That's
so
good.
It was pretty fantastic. Again, kind of a touch point.
Yeah, so, like this morning, I had a doctor's appointment, and the person that's seen me, introducing me into the doctor's office, she tells me I'll go to LCBC. And then the nurse's assistant or doctor's assistant that comes in says, oh, by the way, I go to LCBC. And I'm checking out, and another lady says, I used to go to LCBC, now I go to Catholic Church. And then as I'm actually walking out of the patient room, a lady comes in and goes, are you Pastor David? And she said, I hate to see you here at the doctor's office, but I go to LCBC. And it's just fun to go everywhere. And so what's interesting, Scott, is, around Manheim, I expect that to happen. But then we go to these locations that are an hour or 2 hours away, and you realize there's some accountability even there, because there's people that go to LCBC at 2,000 person local churches, and they know me even though I've never seen them. And so it's just an interesting scenario. And that accountability piece is interesting. Even when we were one location, I remember a time when my son was young. He's probably, 10 or 11, and we were at Dick's Sporting Good, I think is where we were. And something wasn't right, and I ended up kind of getting upset at the cash register as we're dealing with it. And then when we finished, then the young gal working at the cash register said, thanks, Pastor David, I go to LCBC. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so then it's like, okay. And not that I have to be nice just because, but it makes you realize people are watching, and I need to think about how I'm acting.
It's why you're on step 71.
Exactly.
Part of it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you mentioned your son is a pastor now.
Yes.
Also at LCBC.
Yes.
And obviously, I'm not yet a pastor, but I'm studying currently.
Good for you. That's great.
I had some similar experiences of my dad's a pastor. Maybe I could be a writer, But
Yeah.
I have now come into the idea that I think I would best serve the world as a minister, as somebody who also shares Jesus.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I thank my father for being an inspiration and also a guide. I know a lot of people who I study with might not have as much of a guide. And I don't know if it was the same for you, but I would just like to ask if there's anything you would say to people who are starting out like me, or even something you might say to yourself, something that you would have said or asked or told yourself to do.
Yeah. Well, I would say, Andrew, just the fact that you've been in a pastor's family, you are, I don't know how many miles, but you are miles ahead of the average person that's thinking about becoming a pastor, because you know what it's like. You've watched your dad lead a church, you've watched your mom deal with people at church and how she's involved. And so you understand the mechanics of church, and that's a huge advantage. And Andy Stanley, for years, would always say, if he has a chance to hire a pastor's kid, he'll do it every time, because they understand church differently than the average person. And somebody that's not been in a church or not been in a pastor's family, sometimes maybe comes in with rose-colored glasses and thinks that everything's always going to be easy, and you realize that's not terrible, but it's not always easy too. People are people, whether it's in a church or whether it's in a business. You'd like to think that it's always going to be better and more civil in a church setting, but it's not always. And so you know that already. So first of all, you're way ahead, and I think that's a cool thing. And I think it's a real tribute to your parents that you would even consider now being involved in ministry. But I think the biggest thing is just get involved and try different things. I mean, I think this tour for you is very cool because you get to see different models and different things. And I just say the easiest way to kind of move ahead in a church setting, at least at LCBC, is get involved and plug in somewhere and serve. And if you're doing it and you're trustworthy, you're doing it with excellence, and you've got chemistry with the people, you're going to get noticed. And somebody's going to go, oh man, Andrew, have you seen what he does and how he operates? They're going to give you more opportunities. And it kind of goes back to the whole, why would anybody give you more opportunity if you're not faithful with the opportunities you've been given? And so you're faithful with the things that the chances, the opportunities to lead and serve that you're given. And you don't go in with an entitlement mindset. I think a lot of times people come into churches, want to serve in the church with an entitlement mindset that I've been to seminary, I've been to Bible college, or I've been in a church before and I should be able to be the top leader. It's like, no. Come in and find the lowest place, start serving, do it well. You'll get noticed, you'll get more opportunities, and you keep doing it faithfully. I mean, for me, trustworthiness is one of the most important things, where if you come in and take on a role in the church and I don't have to worry about, is he going to show up? Is he going to do what he's supposed to? Then that's huge, and you're just going to continue to grow in your opportunities. And that's kind of the way it worked for me, and that's the way it works here. I think getting training is real important because you do need that foundation. And sometimes I question whether or not a seminary degree is worthwhile because it's a lot of work, and a lot of what you learn isn't really applicable in a church setting, but I think it's a real solid foundation. And when I was second year at Dallas Seminary, it's a 4-year master's program. 1 year of, you have to do 3 years of Greek, 2 years of Hebrew, and I'm not a language guy, and it was killing me. And I remember going to a prof mid-semester, my second year, saying, this isn't me, I'm not cut out for this. His challenge to me was, don't ever quit in the middle of a storm. Get through the storm that you're going through right now. At the end of the semester, once you're through that storm, if you need to change programs, if you need to quit, that's fine, but don't quit in the middle of the storm. And I look back at that now, and had I quit in the middle of the storm, had I changed degrees in the middle of the storm, then I wouldn't have been able to be a part of much of what I'm a part of now. And so you're laying the foundation, and I think it's important.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's great advice.
Thank you.
So you've been a huge blessing to us. I made that phone call, sent the email first, and made a follow-up phone call. And when your executive director from Advantage emailed back and called back, I was overwhelmed that you said you would do this. You'd take the time for us. You're president of GLN, you're president of the Advantage and founder of that with other people as well. You're pastor emeritus here, still teaching pastor. You've got tons of things on your plate in addition to being a father, grandfather, and a husband. And so it's just really a huge blessing. I said to my wife, I think I might have reeled in the biggest fish I cast for on the first cast.
You should have shot higher. Who knows what you could have gotten.
And you know, you are a blessing. You said at the start of this that people don't know who you are, and that's an amazing blessing that you're able to continue in that same kind of humility. People do know who you are, and you are a blessing to the local churches and an inspiration to those of us who are not seeking to be large network speakers, but to be faithful local pastors want to introduce people to Jesus. And one of my favorite Bible passages, of course, from Colossians, therefore as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with, and one of the things that he lists, Paul does, is humility. And you do that. And so I think you do that really, really well. And I saw that at the conference where I saw you speak the first time. I see that today.
Thank you.
And I hear it in your staff as well, the way that they talk about you. So just praise God for that. And part of this is remembering your first love. That's what we're about, going around the country trying to do. And the beginning of that Bible passage applies to you too, so that you would know you're chosen, that you're holy, and that you're dearly loved by God. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny, when I was growing up as a kid in Dallas, around Dallas Seminary, around lots of pastors, I didn't like pastors. And that was also another reason why I didn't want to be around. I just didn't like the way they were when they were seminary students, probably because it was all about the minute details of theology. And so I always thought I just didn't like pastors. But this stage of my life, I love pastors, and I love to be around pastors because I think what you're doing, what we're doing is so, so critical. I mean, again, if we're the hope of the world, then our churches need to thrive and excel. And so anytime I have opportunity to be around pastors, I enjoy that very much. And and again, had a wonderful time with you guys in New Orleans, and so real fond memories of that, and so appreciate you guys and how you're leading, Scott. So
awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And God bless your next steps.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Andrew, thank you. Good talking with you guys.
Thank you.
Nice. Well, good. Look forward to talking some more later, and God bless you.
Amen.
We'll use that as our clap finish. Man, you're a good interview.